My wife said she was going to the company dinner, and that night, something inside me begged me not to let it go unnoticed. There was a subtle smell of lies in the small details, the way she avoided my gaze when leaving, the perfume she never wore with me, the care with the lingerie she hid at the bottom of her bag, as if she were going not to a dinner, but to another universe where I didn't exist. I was not jealous, nor suspicious by nature. I've always trusted blindly, almost devoutly, and perhaps that's why reality hit me like a runaway train when I discreetly parked on the other side of the street and saw, with my own eyes, my wife kissing another man with a painful naturalness, as if repeating a long-standing habit. She smiled. She smiled the way she hadn't smiled at me in a while. She looked at him with a lightness that crushed me. I didn't just see a kiss. I saw the end of my importance, the disintegration of my existence in her world. At that moment, I understood, I was just one more person. And it wasn't just one more for her, it was just one among others. I returned home without her noticing. The smell of betrayal still stuck to me, like an invisible smoke that burned the lungs and clouded the soul. I sat in the kitchen, at the table where we shared cold dinners and warm silences, and stared into space. I looked at the photos on the walls, the memories that now seemed to mock me. I spent the morning remembering every, "I love you," she said, trying to understand which one she no longer believed. And then, I decided that I would not be the betrayed man who withdraws, who hides, who forgives the unforgivable. No. I would construct a divorce she would never forget. One that wouldn't just be signed, it would be felt on the skin, in the bones, in the soul. I started in silence. I became an observer of her world. Every step, every excuse, every lie masked as a routine became a piece of a cruel puzzle that she would never have imagined I was putting together. She continued her life of fake smiles and distant touches, believing that I was the same man as always. She had no idea that I was reading his messages while he slept, that I already knew where he lived, where he worked, what kind of wine he liked. I knew more about her lover than she knew about me. During the day, I was the perfect husband, attentive, serene, loving. Each morning, he kissed her forehead with the precision of a surgeon about to cut into his own breast. She smiled, and that destroyed me more than the kiss I witnessed. Because in that smile there was the certainty that he was in control. But little did she know that the puppet had cut its strings. Sometimes I wondered when it started. When exactly did I stop being the love of her life to become a poorly paid extra in the routine theater? Maybe it was when I stopped noticing his new locks of hair, or when I stopped making him laugh at breakfast. Or maybe not. Maybe it was before, when she decided I wasn't enough, even though I gave it my all. What destroyed me wasn't the kiss. It was the fact that she did it calmly, as if the other person had been part of the script for a long time, and I, a footnote. She didn't know that the house papers were already in my name before the wedding. That the joint account was just a facade, a social agreement that I kept out of habit. She didn't know that the friends she admired so much were, in fact, my allies, who already knew about the betrayal before me, but respected me enough to wait for the right moment to tell me. When I finally saw the two of them entering a hotel together, I realized there was something even more cruel, the pleasure she took in living a double life. It wasn't just desire, it was pride. She was proud of the secret she carried. I came home that day with cold hands and dry eyes. The pain no longer cried, it screamed inside my chest like a trapped animal. I welcomed her with a smile and a candlelit dinner. She seemed surprised, but pretended to like it. She hugged me, and for the first time, I hugged her back like a stranger. The difference is that she didn't notice. I was already used to the emptiness. She had no idea that, as she sipped her red wine, I had already set the court date. That I had already gathered the evidence, hired the best lawyer and anticipated each clause. That the apartment where she hid with her lover had been bought with my money, and that the receipts were now part of the process. She had no idea that I had discovered that, out of pride, she never read the fine print of the prenup she signed in the impulse to be in love. And she would never imagine the final blow. When the judge read, in court, that she would lose her apartment, her car, her furniture, her trips and her comfort, she would understand that betrayals have a price, and sometimes that price is all you have. Because love, when betrayed, becomes justice. And I would make sure everyone was there. Friends. Co-workers. Family members. So that she not only had to deal with material loss, but with the collapse of the image she had built so much. And as for the lover, well, he hasn't even begun to understand what he's gotten himself into. His peaceful life, his prestige, his image as a reliable man was about to be slowly eroded. Not with screams. But with silence, tests, and time, the time I used to calmly dig the hole where he would throw himself. I wasn't going to hit, I wasn't going to confront. I was just going to make everything he loved turn against him, with a surgical precision that only a betrayed but still lucid man would be able to plan. This story, however, is not just about heartbreak. It's about how betrayal can transform the purest love into a meticulous plan of elegant revenge. It's about silent pain that turns into strategy. About a man who chose not to beg, not to take revenge with screams, but with class and coolness. Who preferred to get up from the ground with the strength of someone who lost everything, but still has dignity. And it is along this path, between cold dinners and hot lies, that an ending emerges that no one expects. Because it's not always the betrayal that hurts the most, it's what it reveals about the person you loved. And when everything seemed already destroyed, a new door opened. One that she never imagined he would have the courage to cross. But what she will see at the end of this divorce, is something that not even her lawyers were prepared for. Because there was a detail, a clause buried in the papers of the past, a silent and meticulously calculated movement that would change not just the present, but the future of everyone involved. And that's where the real turnaround begins. Welcome to the channel. Here, we make one thing very clear: we do not support, encourage or romanticize any type of betrayal. The stories told are completely fictitious, created with the sole purpose of showing, with intensity and realism, how betrayal is capable of destroying lives, families and trusts that took years to build. Now take a deep breath, prepare your feelings, because what comes next is a shocking story, with twists and turns that will move you from start to finish. Good story. Lucas and Emily seemed, in the eyes of others, the ideal couple. They had met at a business conference in Lisbon, when they were both still building their careers and learning to balance ambition and affection. He, a respected financial consultant, known for his quick thinking and serenity; she, public relations at a technology multinational, with a magnetic ability to transform any uncomfortable silence into an engaging conversation. They were different in many ways, but something between them fit together in an almost choreographed way. Lucas's emotional security compensated for Emily's creative concerns. He was more restrained, observant, thoughtful. She was spontaneous, seductive, with a vibrant energy that made the atmosphere lighter whenever she entered a room. She was the type of woman who made others watch from afar and men sit up straighter in their chairs, even without understanding why. The relationship blossomed naturally. Neither of them was given to grand romantic gestures, but there was a genuine complicity, built in airport cafes, long phone calls in different time zones, and a collection of small promises that were fulfilled over time. After 3 years together, they decided to get married. The wedding was intimate, without exaggeration, with a discreet celebration in Tuscany, surrounded only by those who were truly part of their story. It was there that Lucas, amid vineyards and honey-colored sunsets, whispered that he wanted to grow old by her side. And she responded with her eyes, holding his hands tightly, as if holding an entire life between her fingers. They built an elegant home in a prime area of the city, in a house that mixed minimalism and comfort, just like both. Lucas made a point of keeping order; he was the type to organize his shirts by color and his finances by quarter. Emily, on the other hand, valued improvisation, the creative touch, and her corner of the house was always the liveliest: colorful pillows, hanging plants, art books stacked up. Even with their differences, there was a type of mutual respect between them that went beyond words. One look was enough to know something was wrong. A prolonged silence, and he already knew she was processing something important. In the social environment, they were admired. Emily had an elegant and engaging presence, while Lucas conveyed security and stability. Their closest friends said they balanced each other perfectly, like wine and a glass. And for a long time, it really was like that. Lucas was methodical, and that's why he was able to remain calm in moments of turbulence. Emily was the wind that moved his calm, and together they seemed to be each other's answer to the questions that life posed. Over the years, Lucas became more involved in long-term projects, taking on responsibilities that required nights and weekends of dedication. Emily reached new heights in her career, being promoted to Strategic Communications Manager, a position that required her to be constantly present at events, meetings and, frequently, traveling for work. Still, they found time to maintain rituals that strengthened the bond: coffee on the balcony on Sundays, dinners on Fridays, even if they were simple. In the eyes of the world, they were a couple who had overcome the wear and tear of time with maturity and partnership. But behind the curtain of the perfect routine, there were subtle noises. Not fights, not open discussions, but imperceptible absences that accumulated like dust. Lucas often preferred not to mention how lonely he felt when she had to travel at the last minute. He kept to himself the discomfort of seeing her increasingly connected to her cell phone, even during moments of rest. Emily, in silence, felt that his eyes were no longer searching for her with the same intensity. It wasn't a lack of love. It was something more complex. An emotional distance that is built not by lack of love, but by unspoken accommodations, by an excess of confidence in "we'll sort it out later." The house, still beautiful and full of history, began to change in small details. The sofa where they used to lie together started to receive only one body at a time. Glasses of wine were no longer shared, and dinners, once sacred, began to be replaced by meals at different times. Lucas remained careful with everything, but there was no longer any shine in his actions. He found himself working later and later at the office, saying the numbers kept him distracted. Emily, in turn, immersed herself in events and side projects, as if she was looking for excitement in external challenges that she no longer found at home. Still, there was no apparent hurt. Just 2 long silences. Automatic gestures. Kisses given out of habit and not out of desire. It was as if they lived a paused story, a life on standby, where they both remembered what they had already felt, but could no longer access it. There were days when Lucas watched her sleeping and tried to find traces of the woman he fell in love with. And there were nights when Emily would see him making coffee in the kitchen and wonder if that silent man was the same man who made her laugh on car trips through the mountains. Despite their absences, both maintained respect. There were no verbal betrayals, no shouting or aggression. It was the suffocating calm of couples who have become too accustomed to each other. Friends commented on how mature they looked, but none of them saw the loneliness that lay beneath the polished surface. Emily smiled in the photos and Lucas remained elegant in social engagements. But when they were alone, the silence was often louder than any conversation. Emily started getting ready more often, claiming that she needed to look impeccable at company events. Lucas, always discreet, praised gently, but without the intensity he had before. She noticed. And he didn't say anything. Lucas, in turn, felt that the hugs were shorter, that her eyes were no longer looking for him as before. But I'd rather not go into that subject. It was as if there was a silent pact between the two, pretending that everything was fine while everything was falling apart little by little, without scandal. On weekends, when there was no travel, Emily involved herself in courses and side projects. Lucas, who had previously insisted that they travel together, began to accept her plans with a discreet smile. Physical intimacy also changed, but so gradually that neither of them dared to comment. They still slept in the same bed, but with the feeling that something fundamental had been lost along the way. They still said, "I love you," but with voices that sounded more and more like repetition and less like truth. One day, Emily commented on a company gala dinner, an important annual event where only the most strategic employees were invited. Lucas made a light comment, said that she would shine as always, and wished her a good night. She kissed him on the forehead, and left, leaving behind a perfume that he could no longer identify. Alone in the living room, Lucas poured himself a glass of wine and stared at the closed door. There was no anger. There was just a cold discomfort, as if he had forgotten something very important but didn't know what. It was in this kind of silence that the real story began to unfold. In the small gestures, between the lines, in the absences that became routine. No one screamed, no one ran out the door banging. And maybe that's why everything was so dangerous. Because when love doesn't die in one blow, but dissolves little by little, no one notices the exact moment in which it ceases to exist. Emily and Lucas were still together. But, every day, they seemed more like two strangers sharing memories of what they were, and avoiding seeing what they had become. And all of that, although it seemed under control, was about to change forever. That week started like any other, with the usual rhythm of meetings, emails, tight schedules and cold dinners that had already become a constant in Lucas and Emily's home. She was talking excitedly about a new company campaign that would require her special dedication in the coming months, while he just nodded lightly, showing interest more in her presence in front of him than in the words themselves. He no longer expected great demonstrations, nor was he surprised by the frequency of trips that came up at short notice, or by the excuses she made to leave early or return late. Life went on, in silence, through the corridors of that house where they had already dreamed so much, now occupied by footsteps that were too soft, voices that were too measured, as if any deeper conversation threatened to collapse the walls of a castle built on memories. On Thursday, she mentioned the company's gala dinner with a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a while, but that somehow didn't seem directed at him. He said he would have to leave work early to get ready and that he would spend the night at the event hotel, as the company had reserved rooms for all strategic managers and it would be rude to refuse. Lucas just smiled, but his throat tightened involuntarily. There was something strange about the way she avoided eye contact when she spoke, how quickly she diverted the topic when he tried to find out more. It wasn't exactly distrust, it was intuition. And Lucas had always learned to listen to silences more carefully than words. The morning of the event, Emily left early, looking more dressed up than usual, with a small suitcase that she said contained only makeup and a spare dress. Lucas kissed her forehead, wished her good luck, and stood there at the door watching the car disappear into the distance. When he closed the door, he sat on the sofa without turning on the television, feeling his breathing heavy. There was something inside him that couldn't be named, but that crept in with the same feeling as when someone comes home and realizes that something has been moved, even without visible evidence. During the day, he tried to distract himself with spreadsheets, contracts and routine tasks. He ate lunch alone, as usual, but the food seemed tasteless. In the afternoon, he felt an uneasiness rising in waves, a need to know, to confirm something that not even he himself wanted to accept. Around 9 o'clock at night, he put on a dark shirt, took the car keys and decided to go to the event location. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, perhaps a gesture, a look, something that would relieve him or destroy him all at once. He arrived at the hotel with his heart pounding but his face expressionless. I knew I needed to proceed with caution. He sat at the lobby bar, ordered a drink and carefully observed every detail around him. The main hall was exquisitely decorated. Behind the glass doors, he could see people dancing, toasting, smiling with that kind of enthusiasm typical of corporate events that mix vanity and politics. It wasn't long before he saw Emily among them, dressed in an elegant dark blue dress that he had never seen before. She was laughing, with a glass of champagne in her hand, and spun slightly to the music, as if floating in another reality. What caught Lucas's attention, however, was not the laughter, nor the dress. It was the way she held the arm of the man next to her. There was no exaggeration, there was no scandal. There was only an implicit intimacy, a closeness that transcends the acceptable. They talked closely, exchanged glances for too long, and at one point, he touched her on the back with a subtle gesture, but one that said more than any words. Lucas couldn't look away. Each second seemed to stretch as if time mocked his pain. He felt heat rising to his face, a knot forming in his stomach, and an uncontrollable desire to get up and confront everything. But it stopped. He took a deep breath. Observed. And he decided he needed more than that moment to understand what to do. He drove home in silence, driving slowly, his mind on fire and his heart in ruins. He slept little that night, and when he did, he dreamed of distant voices, of memories mixed between what was real and what was already lost. The next day, Emily returned late in the afternoon, as she had warned, bringing with her the smell of a perfume she didn't use at home and a slightly evasive look. He said the event was a success, that everyone was excited about the results of the last quarter and that he just needed a hot shower to rest. Lucas just nodded, trying not to show the abyss that had opened between the two. In the following days, he became even more attentive. He began to notice details that he previously ignored, the way she walked away to answer calls, the rush with which she left the house even without urgent commitments, the nervousness contained when being surprised by a casual question. She began reviewing shared computer histories, checking bank statements, tracking steps she thought she was hiding perfectly. And with each discovery, his pain became clearer. The following week, Emily announced that she would have another important meeting in the evening. He said it shouldn't take long, but didn't give many details. Lucas just nodded, but that night, instead of staying at home, he left in silence and went to the meeting location. He parked the car discreetly on a parallel street and waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30, and then he saw a familiar car park across the street. It was her. And I wasn't alone. The man who got out of the car next to her was the same man from the event. Well-dressed, confident smile, light gestures. They walked together to a discreet restaurant, with low lights and an intimate atmosphere. Lucas followed at a distance, sitting at a table in the back. He ordered a coffee just to disguise his presence. He observed without being seen. And there, in the middle of a silent toast, he saw confirmation. They kissed. It wasn't an impulsive kiss, nor a hidden one. It was calm, serene, rehearsed. A kiss from someone who was already used to repeating that act. A kiss that sealed more than a date. It sealed the certainty that he, Lucas, was no longer part of that plot. On the way home, the world seemed to spin in slow motion. There was no more room for doubt. Everything was before him with the clarity of a punch. Emily had carved out a parallel life as she slept next to him every night. She smiled at someone else, gave herself to someone else, and still maintained the mask of a committed woman. But what hurt wasn't just the kiss. It was the fact that all this time, she had made him feel guilty about the distance that was growing between them. She made him believe that the problem was the routine, the natural wear and tear of time, the lack of time. And yet, she had already chosen. She had already crossed the line. Lucas arrived home with a broken heart. He entered slowly, lay down on the sofa without turning on the light, and stayed there for hours, reviewing every scene, every gesture, every lie disguised as normality. There were no screams, there were no tears. Just the heavy silence of someone who finally sees the truth without filters. Emily arrived late, smelling of wine and expensive perfume, and commented that the meeting had gone on longer than expected. He just responded with a blank stare and a slight wave. This was no time for confrontations. Not yet. That night, lying next to her, listening to her calm breathing, Lucas mentally plotted his next step. He knew that, to do justice to the pain he felt, it was not enough to confront it. I needed to understand everything. I needed proof, details, mastery. And, more than that, I needed to be ready for what came next. Because something inside him, until then dormant, had awakened. And the betrayal he had suffered, was just the beginning. The following Saturday, Lucas woke up before the sun rose. He spent long minutes staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what he knew and what he needed to do. The decision had already been made. It was not driven by impulse, nor by anger. It was a cold, clear resolution, based on everything he had lived and endured in silence. Emily was still sleeping next to him, with the serene face of someone who believes she lives in a well-protected lie. He got up without making a sound, took a shower, dressed with the calm of someone going to a common meeting, and left without saying goodbye. There was an address I needed to visit. The name was etched into her bank records, hotel reservations, and recent transfers that she thought she was hiding well. But Lucas was always too detailed to ignore any trace. He arrived at the downtown office building just before 9. He went up to the 9th floor and entered the reception of a business consulting firm. He asked to speak to the co-owner and presented a business card as if it were just a business meeting. He waited a little. When the door opened, there he was. The man from the restaurant, from the gala dinner, his face etched into his retina with the precision of hurt. He wore an elegant suit and smiled with the self-confidence typical of someone who believes he controls all the boards. He extended his hand with a slight air of formality, but Lucas didn't respond. He looked directly into his eyes, and for a second, the smile disappeared. It was impossible not to recognize the intensity of that look. Emily's lover swallowed hard and tried to maintain his composure. Lucas said he wanted to talk privately, about something that would certainly interest both of them. The other hesitated, but the security of his position made him accept. Inside the room, Lucas sat calmly, crossed his legs and took out an envelope from his briefcase. He placed it on the table with the lightness of someone delivering an invitation, not a sentence. He said in a firm voice that he knew everything. The case, the meetings, the messages. He detailed places, dates, times. The lover tried to deny it at first, then to remain silent, and finally, embarrassed, he admitted with half words. Lucas only interrupted him to say that he was not there for revenge, but for justice. And then he took out another, sturdier envelope and threw it on the table. There were the contracts. The signatures. The transfers. The structure of the new company they had founded months before, him and Emily. The lover gasped. He said it didn't make sense. That Emily was just an informal partner in ideas, that they talked about business in an unpretentious way. Lucas then leaned forward slightly and said, in a voice that shook not with anger but with disgust, that the whole thing had been engineered based on a lie. Emily had involved him in a plan much bigger than he imagined. And now they would both pay the price. The man turned pale. He said he never signed anything in a compromising way. Lucas corrected him. He said that, in a meeting recorded on video, as his office had cameras throughout the space, they had discussed the legal structure and the division of quotas in the presence of witnesses. That he, as a formal partner in a venture capital fund, of which Lucas was the main, silent and controlling investor, had committed to clauses that provided for severe punishments in case of breach of contractual ethics. And that all of that was already in the hands of the lawyers. The lover collapsed. She tried to argue that she didn't know, that she wasn't aware that her husband was the investor behind the business. But Lucas was unmoved. He got up, collected the documents and said that the next time they saw each other would be in court. The lover tried to reach him, but Lucas just smiled disdainfully, opened the door and left without looking back. On the way back, he felt strangely calm. There were no more doubts, nor anguish. Just the certainty that he had regained control. In the evening, he prepared a simple dinner. Emily arrived smiling, as if nothing had happened, and greeted him with a light kiss. She said she was exhausted, that the week had been hard. Lucas commented that he had also had an important day, that he had made decisions and that he needed to talk. She looked surprised, but maintained her composure. They sat at the table, served the wine, and between mouthfuls, Lucas said, with all the serenity he had cultivated in the last few days, that he wanted to separate. Emily froze. He slowly dropped the cutlery, as if processing information he wasn't expecting. He asked if he was joking, if anyone was there. Lucas laughed. She said no, that there was never anyone other than her, but that it no longer mattered. Emily insisted. He asked if it was because of the routine, the distance. He said they could try again, that maybe they needed a trip, a reconnection. Lucas shook his head, calmly, and said that she knew exactly why he was asking that. She turned pale, but still tried to maintain the charade. He asked if he was feeling well, if he had had any emotional breakdown. Lucas just said he knew. I knew everything. From the meetings. From the messages. From dinners. From the restaurant. From the hotel. Of intertwined hands, of discreet kisses. She tried to deny it, but without conviction. The voice trembles, the eyes teary. Lucas didn't scream. He didn't accuse. He just said there was no more room for lying between them. And that, even in the face of everything, he still respected her enough to give her the chance to leave with dignity. Emily cried. He said he didn't know how to explain it. That he was sorry. That it all started without intention, as a distraction, as a need to feel alive. Lucas didn't respond. He just looked at her, as if he were seeing a stranger. When she asked if there was anything else, if he intended to make her the target of scandal, Lucas said the divorce would be clean. But, legally, he had taken precautions. That the apartment, the investments, and even the house where they were located belonged exclusively to him since before the marriage. That the property separation regime had been validated by additional clauses, written and registered with a notary at a time when she blindly trusted it. Emily gasped. He asked if he was serious. Lucas got up and took out a folder complete with records, contracts and evidence. He handed it to her without saying anything else. Emily flipped through the papers with trembling fingers. The expression on his face changed with each line he read. Reservations in your name, messages, dates. Everything there. And what's more, the movement of the fund that she and her lover had created together, revealing that the invested capital was, in fact, Lucas's. She let the papers fall to the floor. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He sat down slowly, not knowing where to look. Lucas just said there was no hate. There was disappointment. That she didn't just cheat on him with another man. She tried to build a new life on his shoulders, without him knowing. And that, more than the adultery, was what hurt. Emily tried to get up, tried to reach him, but Lucas took a step back. He said that all that was now in the past. And that her future, from that point on, would depend solely on her, because on his part, the cycle had ended. When he left the house that night, Lucas didn't look back. There was nothing left to look for there. Inside, Emily fell to her knees on the living room floor, surrounded by documents she never imagined she would one day hold. There, amid tears and silent screams, she began to understand the true weight of the choices she made. But what she still didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the ruin that was to come. Because what Luke prepared, had not yet been completely revealed. Lucas spent the night out. He drove aimlessly through streets that now seemed unrecognizable, as if the city had changed shape along with everything he believed to be real. He stopped in front of an old park where he and Emily used to walk in the early years of their marriage. The bench where they used to sit was still there, untouched, but it now seemed like the setting of a story that no longer belonged to it. She sat with her hands in her pockets, facing the damp darkness of dawn, in no hurry, without direction. For the first time in years, he was completely alone within himself, with no plans, no future mapped out. It was strange, but at the same time, there was a cruel lightness to that forced release. As if, by losing everything, I was finally free. On Sunday morning, while Emily was still trying to catch her breath inside that house that no longer felt like hers, Lucas was in his lawyer's office. The room was silent, lit by a soft light that filtered through the curtains. Anna Reinhardt received him with the seriousness of someone who already knew everything, but expected him to say it out loud. Lucas, with the same calm he had used to dismantle his wife's theater, handed over the final folder, with the additional documents. He said he wanted to speed up the process, that he did not want any attempt at agreement or negotiation. The separation needed to be definitive, irrevocable. Anna watched him for a few seconds in silence and then agreed, saying that she would see to it that the papers were delivered to the other party the following day, accompanied by an order to vacate the property within 30 days. Lucas didn't ask for more. He just thanked her with a firm handshake and left. Meanwhile, Emily walked around the house like a visitor. Every object seemed out of place, every room seemed to watch her comings and goings with silent judgment. She tried to tidy up the cushions, wash the dishes, fold clothes, as if these everyday gestures could restore the normality she had destroyed. He avoided calling Lucas. I knew that any attempt would be ignored. But late in the afternoon, the phone rang. It was his sister, asking if she had been informed of the hearing scheduled for 3 days later. Emily couldn't hide her shock. 3 days. No time to breathe. The sister said that she thought it was important for her to prepare, that Lucas was firm in his decision. Emily thanked him and hung up. She stood there, motionless, looking at the device as if it were a gun fired at her. On Tuesday, in court, the two met again. She arrived first, accompanied by a new lawyer, too young to inspire confidence. Lucas arrived later, alone. It was impeccable, serene, like someone who has already lived through a hurricane and now just watches the debris being swept away. When Emily's eyes met his, she almost faltered. There was a coldness in that look that she had never known. And it wasn't hate. It was absence. What destroyed her was realizing that he no longer felt anything. The hearing was short, almost impersonal. The judge confirmed that there was no contest and granted the separation based on the attached documents. When the magistrate read aloud the clause that determined that all assets had been in Lucas's exclusive name since before the wedding, the room fell into absolute silence. Emily lowered her head, her face burning, as her lawyer flipped through the papers without knowing how to react. In the end, Lucas signed quickly and stood up. Emily tried to speak, but he just stared at her for a moment, said a simple goodbye, and walked out the door without turning his face. Over the next few days, Emily stayed in the house, slowly packing her bags, as if postponing her departure was also trying to postpone reality. He sent messages that were not answered, wrote letters that he would never deliver. On a rainy afternoon, a pickup truck parked in the garage. It was the moving truck. The employees entered and began packing the belongings indicated by a list previously sent by Lucas. She watched silently, each box being sealed as if they were forcibly ripped off body parts. Already settled in a small rented apartment, Emily lived amid emptiness and silence. The friends disappeared. The messages stopped. Even her lover disappeared, after being pressured by the company's own board of directors. They discovered that he had broken ethics clauses in his contract and, to avoid bigger scandals, his departure was negotiated. He tried to reach her once or twice, but she didn't answer. I was alone. Completely. Meanwhile, Lucas allowed himself a new routine. There was no euphoria, there was no rush. But he had started to find himself again in small ways. Solitary walks, silent cafes, forgotten books. Until, one ordinary day, he met Clara. She was a longtime friend of her sister, who was passing through the city to coordinate a social project in the region. It was a chance meeting, in a bookstore, where they both fought for the same copy of a book of chronicles. They laughed, talked for a few minutes and then went their way. But something there remained. The next day, she showed up at the coffee shop he frequented, with the book in hand and a smile that didn't demand anything. The meetings became frequent, always casual, always light. Clara didn't ask questions about the past, she just listened when he wanted to talk. It was sweet but firm. Independent but generous. And there was a calm about her that didn't require masks or rehearsals. Lucas was not looking for a replacement. But he found in her a piece that he no longer remembered existing. They began to meet more frequently, sometimes just to talk about trivial matters. And little by little, without rushing, he began to smile sincerely. Life, somehow, began to breathe again in his hands. One night, Emily saw him by chance in a restaurant. He was with Clara. They both laughed, holding hands, enveloped in a complicity that could not be faked. She didn't come any closer. He just watched from afar, with teary eyes. It wasn't jealousy. It was a deep mourning. For the life he lost, for the man he didn't value, for the dignity he let slip away. And at that moment, I knew I had lost Lucas for good. Not to another woman, but to a version of him that she herself helped destroy. He didn't look in her direction. Maybe he didn't even see her. And if he saw it, he didn't show it. He moved on, as if she were just a shadow in a closed chapter. On leaving the restaurant, while Clara was waiting for him in the car, Lucas stopped for a moment on the sidewalk. He looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and smiled with genuine relief. The pain he had carried for so long was now just a memory. The truth had cost him dearly, but it had set him free. He returned to the car, held Clara's hand firmly and said that, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And in that moment, he understood that the quietest revenge is to move forward, in peace. Because some defeats are just the path to truer beginnings. And Lucas had won, without needing to destroy, without needing to scream. Just being true to yourself, until the end. Life, after the storm, took on a silently definitive form. Lucas woke up with a feeling of lightness that he hadn't known for a long time. Emily's absence from his routine was no longer felt as a gap, but as a release from an emotional structure that had imprisoned him for years without him even realizing it. The house, which previously carried echoes of an oppressive past, gradually gained new contours. Some furniture was replaced, the curtains changed, the pictures moved. More than an aesthetic gesture, it was a symbolic movement. He was redesigning his life, piece by piece, as if rebuilding himself in every detail. But, even involved in this new process, there was no euphoria, nor any rush. It was as if he had finally learned to respect the timing of things, including the time that the heart needs to heal its deepest wounds. Clara began to visit his house little by little. He never imposed himself, never demanded. His care was spontaneous, almost intuitive. She noticed when he needed silence, when his thoughts still traveled through unresolved memories. And instead of trying to replace them, she just stayed. It didn't compete with the past, it didn't demand a future. I just lived in the present with him, with the serenity of someone who understands that some pains only stop when they are fully heard. This made Lucas, even without wanting to, get closer. She started sharing stories, habits, little fears that she previously kept to herself. And with that, something inside him truly began to pulse again. Meanwhile, Emily was going through a moral maze with no way out. He had lost not only his marriage, but also the axis of his own identity. He tried to go back to his old routine, but nothing made sense. Work, once her refuge, has become a burden. Colleagues kept a discreet distance, once kind smiles now sounded forced. It was as if his presence was uncomfortable. Her name had circulated behind the scenes, even without public scandals, and the looks that once admired her now carried judgment. More than the loneliness, it hurt the fact that she knew she had no one to blame but herself. The lover, pressured, disappeared from the map. The friends who previously encouraged her in her games of seduction were now silent. The new house, small and impersonal, was cold not only because of its architecture, but because it carried no memory that was dear to him. There was no echo of laughter, there was no smell of shared coffee, there was no life. She often woke up in the middle of the night feeling like she was falling from somewhere. In some dreams, I saw Lucas smiling at another woman, walking away. In others, he just watched her in silence, with that same courtroom look. A look she would never forget. The weeks passed. Emily tried to gather the strength to start over, but she was faced with her own guilt. He visited his parents a few times, but he didn't have the courage to tell the truth. He just said that the marriage hadn't resisted the routine, the distance. They didn't ask many questions. Emily realized that even they knew more than they let on. And it consumed her. He tried to write a letter to Lucas. Not to apologize or reconcile, but to say he understood now. That she finally understood the damage she had caused, not just on him, but on herself. But every time I started writing, the words died halfway. It was as if there was no way to explain the inexplicable. As if any attempt to justify it was just another layer of lies. Lucas, on the other hand, began to reflect on everything with a different detachment. There was no longer anger, nor indignation. A kind of bitter compassion remained. Not for her, but for himself, for everything he endured in silence for love. He realized that his greatest pain was not the betrayal itself, but the fact that he loved someone who never saw him completely. He loved intensely, with abandon, while on the other side there was only a physical presence, not an emotional one. And that, more than anything else, was what made the fresh start so valuable. I no longer wanted half-baked relationships, loves that depended on masks or unequal efforts. I wanted reciprocity. I wanted peace. And with Clara, that was starting to seem possible. One afternoon, while they were walking together in a park, Clara asked him about plans for the future. Lucas hesitated for a few seconds, not out of fear, but out of respect for the depth of that question. He said he didn't have any definitive answers, but that he would like to remain there, present, available. Clara smiled. She didn't need promises. I just needed truths. And that, he could offer. They sat on a bench under a tree. She held his hand and said that she didn't know where it would take them, but that, if it were up to her, she would continue walking alongside him. Lucas shook his hand lightly. For the first time, those words did not provoke anxiety. Just belonging. Meanwhile, Emily, in her solitude, received an unexpected invitation. One of the company's directors, a man who had always deeply respected her, suggested that she move to a branch in another country. It was a challenging proposal, which involved starting over in a completely new environment, with less glamour, but with the real chance of rebuilding her professional trajectory away from the judgments that surrounded her. Emily spent days reflecting. Initially he saw it as an exile, a punishment. But then he saw it as an opportunity. One last chance to at least try to be someone different. Someone who could one day forgive themselves. The night before the trip, he tried for the last time to write the letter he couldn't finish. And this time, he left aside any attempt at explanation. He limited himself to saying that he hoped Lucas was happy. Who was rooting for him? That she knew, deep down, that he deserved better than she ever knew he was. He folded the sheet carefully, placed it in a white envelope and left it at the entrance of his old address. I didn't expect an answer. Nor did I want to. She just needed those words to come out of her. Like a silent request for forgiveness, even if late. Lucas received the letter 2 weeks later. He read in silence. He didn't cry, he didn't smile. He just closed his eyes for a few seconds and then put the envelope in a drawer. Not because he still felt something, but because he understood that forgiving was a gesture more about him than about her. And he had reached the point where holding a grudge no longer made sense. I had learned that true victory was not destroying those who hurt us, but moving forward with dignity. And that's what he did. Every day, every choice, with the calm of someone who survived their own fall. In the following weeks, he resumed old projects, wrote again, and reconnected with friends he had left behind in an attempt to save a relationship doomed to failure. He felt whole. Not because he was with someone new, but because he had rescued himself. And that was the most important thing. Clara accompanied him without trying to fill in gaps. She just was. Present, constant, real. And in this simplicity, Lucas discovered a new type of love. A love that didn't require effort to exist, but that revealed itself in everyday life, in conversations in the evening, in simple lunches, in comfortable silences. Emily embarked on her new life without looking back. I didn't know what I would find, but I left with the certainty that something needed to change. He still carried the pain of loss, but now he also carried responsibility for everything he caused. It was the beginning of a journey without guarantees, but perhaps, for the first time, with some honesty. And so, between two destinies that took opposite but equally necessary directions, the story began to end. Not with euphoria, nor with full forgiveness, but with maturity. Betrayal, which one day seemed to be the end, turned out to be just the portal to profound transformations. And the dilemma that remained, to continue in anger or to continue in peace, was answered with choices that were born from pain, but blossomed in courage. Because in the end, some happy endings are not the ones where everything works out, but the ones where people finally find themselves. The weeks progressed like a river that insists on continuing its course, even after a landslide. Lucas immersed himself more and more in the new stage of his life, accepting invitations to lectures, resuming professional contacts that he had long left on standby, reviving part of his identity that had been dormant. Clara continued to be present with the same gentleness with which she arrived, following his steps without ever trying to speed them up, and this gave him a new confidence, without pressure, without demands. They started traveling together, little weekend getaways, nothing planned in advance, just driven by the desire to see new places and, little by little, rediscover themselves in unknown territories. On one of these trips, during a walk through a small coastal village, Clara asked him gently if he still thought about Emily. The question was asked without jealousy, just with the honesty of someone who wants to build something on solid foundations. Lucas took a while to respond. He looked at the sea ahead, took a deep breath and said that he didn't think of her with longing, nor with resentment. He was just thinking like someone who remembers a house where he once lived, but which no longer sheltered him. While Lucas was on this new journey, Emily was adapting with difficulty to life in another country. The new position required skills that she mastered, but the environment was colder, less receptive. I needed to start over from scratch, rebuild credibility, gain respect without counting on the charm or charisma that used to be enough. Loneliness followed her like a shadow. Dinners were silent, the nights were too long. Little by little, she began attending an emotional support group for women going through career and life transitions. It was a safe space where he could speak without filters, where for the first time he admitted in so many words that he had destroyed his own marriage out of impulse, out of vanity, out of emotional weakness. He said he was not seeking redemption, just understanding. And it was in this environment that he began to sow, for the first time, a meaning for everything he experienced. The other women didn't judge her. Many of them were also there because of mistakes they made, because of the pain they caused others. It was a territory of raw humanity, where masks were useless. On a particularly difficult night, after an intense group meeting, Emily sat alone on a bench in the Foundation's garden. Tears flowed without her trying to contain them. One of the group's volunteers, a middle-aged man with a similarly fractured past, approached. He sat next to her without saying anything. After a few minutes, he commented that there are pains that accompany us like a tattoo made in a moment of despair. You can't erase them, but you can learn to carry them with dignity. Emily listened in silence, and there she understood that perhaps she would never stop feeling the guilt, but that she could, with a lot of effort, transform it into something useful. And for the first time since everything fell apart, she felt a slight desire to continue living, even with the weight she was carrying now. On the other side of the ocean, Clara and Lucas were watching a musical performance in a small, cozy theater. When the lights went out and the music started, Lucas held her hand and smiled. During the concert, Clara laid her head on his shoulder, and he felt a silent peace he hadn't known in a long time. It was no longer the blind enthusiasm of passion, it was something else, a security that is born when two people recognize each other not by what they expect from each other, but by what they have already experienced before meeting each other. After the presentation, they walked to a nearby restaurant. They sat at the table and talked about the future in a light way, without promises, just possibilities. Clara said that she was thinking about moving to another city to take on a new project, but that she didn't want to do that without talking to him first. Lucas listened carefully, considered honestly, and said that if she decided to go, he would support her, even if the distance was a challenge. He said that he didn't want to be an obstacle in anyone's life, that he had already experienced this, and that now he just wanted to stay where there was freedom. The dilemma set in subtly. Clara had before her the chance to take on a leadership role in an initiative she had always dreamed of, but this would involve change, distance, and a likely redefinition of her relationship with Lucas. He, in turn, knew that forcing her to stay would be repeating the same mistakes as Emily, and he would never do that. They spent weeks pondering, without hasty decisions. Until one night, Clara went to his house with 2 tickets in her hand. One for her, one for him. She said she didn't expect him to go, but wanted to give him the choice. Lucas didn't respond right away. He got up, went to the bookshelf and picked up an old book that they had both read together. In the middle of the book, there was a marker with a note from him to her: "Life is made up of encounters that respect each person's time." He handed her the book and said that although he was still learning to love again, he couldn't ignore how he felt. He said that if she left, he would understand. But if she decided to stay, she would have a man by her side willing to walk with her, without demands, without rushing. Clara cried in silence, hugged him tightly, and that night, they slept together with the certainty that love, when it is true, does not imprison. He waits, he understands, he transforms. In the days that followed, Emily continued her support group sessions, but now she also dedicated herself as a volunteer, helping other women organize their stories and rebuild their ties with the world. He began writing about his experience, not as a personal vent, but as an attempt to stop other people from making the same mistakes. At an event promoted by the foundation, she read an excerpt from one of her texts and, at the end, was sincerely applauded. She was no longer the woman who once seduced her lover in the silence of meetings. He was someone who understood the price of choices and who finally found value in reframed pain. One sleepless night, she decided to access Lucas' profile on a social network. He saw him smiling in a recent photo, next to Clara, in front of a mountain landscape. The two were hugging each other, and there was serenity in his eyes. Emily looked at that image for long minutes. She closed her eyes and wished, in thought, that he was happy. Not as a farewell, but as an acknowledgement, he followed. And she also needed to follow, even if on different paths. Lucas's phone rang in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. It was an unknown number. He answered, suspiciously, and on the other end he heard a hesitant male voice. He was Emily's old lover. The man did not apologize, nor did he seek to justify the past. He just said that he was facing legal problems, that the process initiated by Lucas had resulted in other investigations and that, in the midst of all this, he began to reflect on his own life. He said he knew his call was uncomfortable, but he needed to say thank you. Because it was there, in the middle of that fall, that he realized how much his life was anchored in lies. Lucas didn't say anything. Just listened. When the man finished, he responded with a short sentence: "Pain teaches. But not everyone learns." And hung up. Days later, Clara received confirmation that she could remain on the project in a hybrid format, with occasional trips. This would allow her to stay. He arrived home radiant and told Lucas. He smiled, not with relief, but with gratitude. "I knew it wasn't a simple choice. But it was a choice of love. Not of sacrifice." And that same day, he invited her to visit a piece of land he had purchased some time ago, with the intention of building a new home. They said they were in no rush, that the project would be done little by little. But as they entered the empty lot, where the sun set over the tall grass, Clara held his hand and said that there, she could imagine a future. Lucas looked around and, for the first time, felt that everything, every pain, every loss, every tear, had led him to this moment. There were no more sounds from the past. There was silence, but a silence full of meaning. Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was real. And sometimes, reality, even with its cracks, is the safest place to build something true. And there, between the grass and the orange sky, the two promised something to each other, that they would always tell the truth, even when it hurt. Because they knew, more than anyone, that what destroys is not the absence of love, but the absence of honesty. And this time, that would never be missing. Time, as always, did not warn us when it passed, but made a point of leaving its marks. Months later, Lucas observed the landscape that was lost on the horizon from the top of a terrace. The terrain that was once just soil and silence now began to transform into something more. The foundations of the house were raised, the first contours of a new life took shape, concrete in structure. Beside him, Clara held a hot cup of tea and watched with the calm eyes of someone who had learned to walk slowly, without fear of the speed of the world. There was a complicity between them that needed no words. They didn't need to remember every day what they had experienced before they met. They knew. It was in the pauses, in the gestures, in the delicacy of a touch or in the respect for the silence of the other. And that kind of love, built on accepting the imperfect, was more powerful than any momentary euphoria. On the other side of the world, Emily made decisions that until recently would have seemed unlikely. After dedicating herself to the support group and volunteer work for months, she decided to found her own initiative for women who, like her, were looking to rebuild after making bad decisions. The project gained strength, attracting attention from the press and social investors, which allowed it to expand to other regions. But ironically, the more her public image grew, the lonelier she felt behind the scenes. She was respected, even admired, but no one there knew her true story, her flaws, her pain. She carried this past like a scar hidden beneath her clothes, a constant reminder that she had paid too high a price for choices that, at the time, seemed harmless. One night, after a charity event, Emily received an envelope discreetly left by one of the event coordinators. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from Lucas. She didn't expect any more contact, and the surprise of his handwriting left her without reaction for a few seconds. She sat alone in her room, with the lights off, and read each line with bated breath. He didn't talk about resentments. It didn't mention betrayal or divorce. It was a different letter. He said he understood that forgiving did not mean forgetting, but rather freeing oneself. That the true closure of a cycle was not in destroying the other, but in continuing in peace, with your head held high, aware that you did what was right. And he was unexpectedly grateful for everything he experienced with her, even if the end was painful. Because it was with her that he learned how much love requires courage and how fragile it is when there is a lack of respect. Emily finished reading in tears. That letter was what she didn't know she needed. A silent and dignified closure, which now allowed him, in fact, to start over. The former lover, who for so long lived off the game of manipulating and seducing, faced another type of closure. After being removed from the company, investigated for breach of conduct and accused of irregularities in other contracts, he ended up being exposed on social media by former employees and colleagues. He tried to stay in the spotlight by creating new projects, but his reputation was a minefield. Nothing prospered. Invitations disappeared, contacts avoided him, and even the most open social circles began to treat him with suspicion. Life has shown him that what is built with lies, sooner or later, comes crashing down. He began to live in a simple neighborhood, avoiding public appearances, living off what was left of his savings. No love, no prestige, no legacy. He was now just another man trying to survive his own ego. In his solitude, he began to write a book about ethics in the corporate environment, as if, in some way, he could rescue his own story through the contradiction of warning others not to follow the path he himself chose. Perhaps it would never be published. But writing was, for him, the last gesture of someone trying to shout that they learned. Lucas and Clara, in turn, continued transforming their days with small steps. The house project progressed, and despite the unforeseen events, there was never any disagreement. They knew that life as a couple is not made up of big events, but of everyday decisions, respecting each other's space, listening carefully, sharing the silence. At an outdoor dinner, surrounded by low lights and the sound of a soft trail, Clara looked at him tenderly and said that, for the first time, she felt whole. Not because he completed her, but because, next to him, she could be exactly who she was. Lucas responded with a serene smile. He was aware that love was not about repairing the other's broken pieces, but about knowing how to live with the scars without touching them all the time. A few months later, at a private event among friends and family, they announced that they would have an intimate ceremony. No major formalities, just a symbolic ritual to seal the commitment they already lived and practice. Contrary to what was expected, there was no fanfare, no exaggerated photos, no long speeches. There was only true love, a small group of people rooting for them and the presence of a violinist in the background, discreetly playing a melody that seemed written for that night. When Clara held his hand and said, "I'm here because I chose to be," Lucas felt like every part of his story made sense. Including the painful ones. Because without them, he might never have gotten there. Emily, upon learning about the ceremony through a mutual friend, didn't cry. He smiled slightly. She sent a short message, just wishing him to be happy. I didn't expect an answer. And Lucas, when reading, just responded with a sun emoji. There were no longer any bridges between them, nor any ruins. Just the recognition that some stories end not because of a lack of love, but because of the absence of truth. And that some truths, when ignored, end up burying any possibility of reconstruction. In the following months, the house was ready. Clara brought plants, books, pictures. Lucas took care of the garden with his own hands. And there, among newly planted flowers and windows that opened onto the countryside, the two created a home where there were no ghosts, just new memories being delicately constructed. On one of those afternoons, sitting on the porch, Clara said that she would like to write a book about new beginnings. Lucas said she should. Because no one knew better than her that life always holds new chances, as long as we know how to close old chapters well. And so, without needing big fireworks, the story ends where so many others would begin. With choices made consciously, with characters who were not punished by destiny, but who reaped exactly what they sowed. Because what teaches us most is not the pain of loss, but the responsibility for what we do with it. Lucas did not become a hero. Emily didn't become a villain. Each person followed a different path of reconstruction. And the lover, erased from the social narrative, became just the living reminder that not all cleverness stands the test of time. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Which character marked you the most? Comment your opinion below, it is very important to us. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories that will certainly stir your emotions. And always remember, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Here, we tell fictional stories to show how each choice can change everything, and how the truth, no matter how harsh it may be, will always be the best path. Thank you for following this far.